The paperback edition of The God Delusion is soon to come out in Britain in the middle of May, and in America it will come out in September or October. I've written a longish new preface to the paperback, which consists mostly of replies, responses to criticisms of the hardback. So what I thought I would do today is to give a little performance of reading the preface to the paperback, which nobody here has seen, and then that'll take about the first half, and then the second half we'll have a discussion, and I think we've got a roving mic, which, is that right? We've got a roving mic, which, no? Okay. So we don't have a roving mic, so people will have to just shout when it comes to asking questions, or indeed making comments. I have brought here a Spanish edition of The God Delusion, which what I wanted to do was to bring a lot of copies of this, one for each of our wonderful naturalist guides. But unfortunately, books are extremely heavy and bulky, and I couldn't get them into my suitcase. So what I will do is present this to the ship's library in the hope that the naturalist guides and anybody else may like to read it there. The British paperback, if anybody wants to see it, is here, and it's the preface to that I'm now going to read and then invite questions. The God Delusion in the hardback edition was widely described as the surprise bestseller of 2006. It was warmly received by the great majority of those who sent in their personal reviews to Amazon, more than 1,000 at the time of writing. Approval was less overwhelming in the printed reviews, however. A cynic might put this down to an unimaginative reflex of reviews editors. It has God in the title, so send it to a known faith head. That would be too cynical, however. Several unfavorable reviews began with the phrase, which I long ago learned to treat as ominous, "I'm an atheist, but." As Dan Dennett noted in Breaking the Spell, a bafflingly large number of intellectuals believe in belief, even though they lack religious belief themselves. These vicarious second-order believers are often more zealous than the real thing, their zeal pumped up by ingratiating broad-mindedness. Alas, I can't share your faith, but I respect and sympathize with it. I'm an atheist, but the sequel is nearly always unhelpful, nihilistic, or worse, suffused with a sort of exultant negativity. Notice, by the way, the distinction from another favorite genre. I used to be an atheist, but. That is one of the oldest tricks in the book, much favored by religious apologists from C.S. Lewis to the present day. It serves to establish some sort of street cred up front, and it is amazing how often it works. Look out for it. I wrote an article for the website richarddawkins.net called I'm an Atheist But, and I've borrowed from it in the following list of critical or otherwise negative points from reviews of the hardback. That website, conducted by the inspired Josh Timonen, has attracted an enormous number of contributors who have effectively eviscerated all these criticisms, but in less guarded, more outspoken tones than my own, or than those of my academic colleagues A.C. Grayling, Daniel Dennett, Paul Kurtz, Stephen Weinberg, and others who have done so in print and reproduced on the same website. You can't criticize religion without a detailed analysis of learned books of theology. Surprise bestseller? If I'd gone to town, as one self-consciously intellectual critic wished, on the epistemological differences between Aquinas and Duns Scotus, if I'd done justice to Eriugena on subjectivity, Rana on grace, or Moltmann on hope, as he vainly hoped I would, my book would have been more than a surprise bestseller. It would have been a miraculous one. But that is not the point. Unlike Stephen Hawking, who accepted advice that every formula he published would halve his sales, I would happily have foregone bestsellerdom if there had been the slightest hope of Duns Scotus illuminating my central question of whether God exists. The vast majority of theological writings simply assume that he does, and go on from there. For my purposes, I need consider only those theologians who take seriously the possibility that God does not exist, and argue that he does. This, I think, Chapter 3 does, with what I hope is good humour and sufficient comprehensiveness. When it comes to good humour, I cannot improve on the splendid Courtier's Reply, published by P.Z. Myers, that's P.Z. Myers to you, on his Pharyngular website. I have considered the impudent accusations of Mr. Dawkins with exasperation at his lack of serious scholarship. He has apparently not read the detailed discourses of Count Roderigo of Seville on the exquisite and exotic leathers of the Emperor's boots. Nor does he give a moment's consideration to Bellini's masterwork on the luminescence of the Emperor's feathered hat. We have entire schools dedicated to writing learned treatises on the beauty of the Emperor's raiment, and every major newspaper runs a section dedicated to imperial fashion. Dawkins arrogantly ignores all these deep philosophical ponderings to crudely accuse the Emperor of nudity. Until Dawkins has trained in the shops of Paris and Milan, until he has learned to tell the difference between a ruffled flounce and a puffy pantaloon, we should all pretend he has not spoken out against the Emperor's taste. His training in biology may give him the ability to recognize dangling genitalia when he sees it, but it has not taught him the proper appreciation of imaginary fabrics. To expand the point, most of us happily disavow fairies, astrology, and the flying spaghetti monster without first immersing ourselves in books of Pastafarian theology, etc. The next criticism is a related one, the great straw man offensive. You always attack the worst of religion and ignore the best. You go after crude, rabble-rousing chancers like Ted Haggard, Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, rather than sophisticated theologians like Tillich or Bonhoeffer, who teach the sort of religion I believe in. If only such subtle, nuanced religion predominated, the world would surely be a better place, and I would have written a different book. The melancholy truth is that this kind of understated, decent religion is numerically negligible. To the vast majority of believers around the world, religion all too closely resembles what you hear from the likes of Robertson, Falwell or Haggard, Osama bin Laden or the Ayatollah Khomeini. These are not straw men. They are all too influential, and everybody in the modern world has to deal with them. I'm an atheist, but I wish to dissociate myself from your shrill, strident, intemperate, intolerant, ranting language. Actually, if you look at the language of the God Delusion, it is rather less shrill or intemperate than we regularly take in our stride when listening to political commentators, for example, or theatre, art, or book critics. Here are some samples of recent restaurant criticism from leading London newspapers. It is difficult, if not impossible, to imagine anyone conjuring up a restaurant, even in their sleep, where the food in its mediocrity comes so close to inedible. All things considered, quite the worst restaurant in London, maybe the world, serves horrendous food grudgingly in a room that is a museum to Italian waiters' taste, Kirko 1976. The worst meal I've ever eaten. Not by a small margin, I mean the worst, the most unrelievedly awful. What looked like a sea mine in miniature was the most disgusting thing I put in my mouth since I ate earthworms at school. The strongest language to be found in the God Delusion is tame and measured by comparison. If it sounds intemperate, it is only because of the weird convention, almost universally accepted, see the quotation from Douglas Adams in the book, that religious faith is uniquely privileged, above and beyond criticism. Insulting a restaurant might seem trivial compared to insulting God, but restaurateurs and chefs really exist, and they have feelings to be hurt. Whereas blasphemy, as the witty bumper sticker puts it, is a victimless crime.